Justice shall be done. Is there danger? A sound plan. Of course. The light is my strength. Is there danger? Justice shall be done. A sound plan. For honor. Of course. For honor. Of course. For honor. Of course. A sound plan. Certainly. Of course. For honor. A sound plan. Certainly. A sound plan. For honor. A sound plan. For honor. Certainly. A sound plan. Of course. For honor. Certainly.
Our allied town is
A
being
sound
attacked.
plan. Certainly. A sound plan. Certainly. Of course. A sound plan. Of course. For honor. Of course. For
Our
honor.
allied town is
Of
being
course.
attacked.
For honor. Of course. For honor. Of course. Certainly. For honor. Certainly. I stand for the light. A sound plan. For honor. A sound plan. Certainly. Of course. Certainly. A sound plan. Certainly. Of course. For honor. Of course. For honor. Certainly. For honor. Certainly. A sound plan. Certainly. Of course. For honor. A sound plan. Certainly. A sound plan. Of course. For honor. Certainly. A sound plan. Of course. A sound plan. Of course. For honor. Of course. For honor. Of course. A sound plan. Certainly. Of course. A sound plan. Of course. A sound plan. Certainly. A sound plan.
Our allied town is being
I'm
attacked.
here to help.
Can I help
Justice shall be done.
you? Hello?
I stand for the light. Is there danger? I'm here to help. For honor. Of course. Certainly. Of course. A sound plan. For honor. Of course. I stand for the light. I'm here to help.
Our allied hero
I
has been
stand for the
slain.
light.
Time. Look around.
Is there danger? Certainly. For honor. Certainly. Of course. Certainly. Of course. For honor. Certainly. For honor. You are past redemption. A sound plan. Of course. A sound plan. For honor. A sound plan.
Our allied town
Of
is
course.
being attacked.
For honor. A sound plan. Of course. A sound plan. Of course. For honor. Of course. Certainly. A sound plan. Certainly. Of course. Certainly. Of course. For honor. Of course. For honor. Certainly. Of course. For honor. Certainly. A sound plan. Of course. Certainly. A sound plan. For honor. Certainly. For honor. Certainly. A sound plan. Of course. For honor. A sound plan. For honor. Of course. A sound plan. Certainly. Of course. Certainly.
Feel my wrath.
Of course. Certainly. A sound plan. For honor. Of course. For honor. A sound plan.
Our allies' hero has been slain.
Of course. Certainly. A sound plan.
Justice has come.
Of course. For honor. Certainly. Of course. Certainly. A sound plan. For Lord Orion. Certainly. A sound plan. For honor. Of course. For honor. A sound plan. I stand for the light. Of course. For honor. A sound plan. For honor. Certainly. Of course. For honor. Of course. Certainly.
Our allies'
Sound
hero
plan.
has been slain.
For honor. Certainly.
Our allied town is being attacked.
Of course. Is there danger? Certainly. For honor. Of course. Certainly. Of course. Certainly. A sound plan. For honor. A sound
Our allied town is being attacked.
I'm here to help. Certainly. A sound plan. For honor. Of course. Certainly. For honor. Of course. For honor. A sound plan. For honor. Of course. A sound plan. For honor. Certainly. A sound plan. Certainly. A sound plan. Of course. From my father the king. Justice has come. For honor. Of course. For honor. I stand. Of course. For honor. A sound plan. Certainly. The light is my strength.
Our hero has been slain. Our allied town is being attacked.
I stand for the light. A sound plan. For honor. A sound plan. Light is my strength. For honor. Of course. For honor. A sound plan. For honor. For my father the king. Certainly. Of course. Certainly. Of course.
Our allied town is being attacked.
I stand for the light. Certainly. Of course. For honor. Certainly. For honor. Is there danger? Of course. For honor.
Our allied town is
Certainly.
being attacked.
A sound plan. Certainly. For honor. A sound plan. For honor. A sound plan. Justice shall be
The dead shall
for
serve.
honor. Of course. For honor. Of course. A sound plan. Of course. For honor. A sound plan. Certainly. For honor. Certainly.
Our allied town is
For
being
honor.
attacked.
Certainly. A sound plan. For honor. Of course. A sound plan. For
Our
honor.
allied town is
A
being
sound
attacked.
plan. For honor. Of course. A sound plan. Justice shall be done. For honor. Certainly. A sound plan. Of course. Certainly. A sound plan. Certainly. Feel my wrath. Is there danger?
Our allied hero has been slain.
For honor. A sound plan.
Our hero has been slain.
The light is my strength.
Our
Certainly.
allies' hero has been slain.
Of course. For Lord Aran. Certainly. Is there danger? Of course. For honor. Of course. A sound plan. Certainly. Of course. For honor. Of course. A sound plan. Of course. For honor. Certainly. Of course. A sound plan. For honor. A sound plan. Of course. Certainly. Of course. For honor. I stand for the light. For honor.
Our allies' hero has
Of
been
course.
slain.
A sound plan. Certainly. For honor. Of course. Certainly. A sound plan. Of course. Certainly. Of course.
Betrayer of the light.
Of course. Certainly. A sound plan. For honor. Is there danger? Of course. Certainly.
Our hero has been slain.
I stand for the light. For honor. Certainly. Of course. A sound. Of course. Certainly. For honor. Is there danger? A sound. For honor. Of course. A sound plan. I'm here to help. Certainly.
Our allied town is being attacked.
Is there danger? I'm here to help. A sound plan. Certainly. A sound plan. Of course. A sound plan. Certainly. Of course. For honor. Certainly. Of course. For honor. Certainly. You are passing now. Of course. Certainly. A sound plan. Certainly. Foul play. For honor. A sound plan. For honor. A sound plan. Certainly. For honor. Certainly. A sound plan. Feel my wrath. Of course. You are past redemption. Justice has come. Certainly.
Our allied town is being attacked!
The light of strength. For honor. Of course. A sound plan. Justice. Is there danger? Of course. For honor. A sound plan. For my father, the king. Certainly. A sound plan. For honor. The light is my strength. Is there danger? A sound plan. For honor. Certainly. The light is my strength. Justice shall be done. Of course.
Our allied
A
town
sound
is
plan.
being attacked!
Certainly. The light is my strength. For honor. Of course. A sound plan. Certainly. For honor. Of course. Certainly. I'm here to help. A sound plan. For honor. Certainly. A sound plan. For honor. A sound plan. Of course. For honor. Certainly. For honor. Foul play. Certainly. For my father, the king. For honor. A sound plan. For honor. Justice is come. A sound plan. Certainly. A sound plan. Certainly. A sound plan. For honor. Certainly. Of course. For honor. Of course.
Our allies' hero has been slain!
A sound plan. I'm here to help. Of course.
Our allies' hero has been slain!
A sound plan. Of course.
Our
Sound
allied town is being attacked!
Of course. For honor. Of course. A sound plan. Certainly. Of course. Is there danger? For honor. Of course.
Our allied
Justice
town
shall
is
be
being
done.
attacked!
A sound plan. For honor. A sound plan. Of course. For honor. A sound plan. Certainly. For Lord Iran. For honor. Certainly. For honor. Of course.
Our allied town is being attacked!
Sound plan. Of course. Certainly. A sound plan. Certainly.
Our allied hero has been slain! Our allied hero has been slain! Our allied town is being
Feel my
attacked!
wrath. Foul play. Of course. For honor. Of course. Certainly. For honor. You are past redemption. Of course. Certainly. Of course. Certainly. The light is my strength. For honor. A sound plan. I'm here to help. Certainly. A sound plan. Of course. For honor. I stand for the light. For honor. I'm here to help. A sound plan. Certainly. Foul pain.
Our allied
Of course.
town is being attacked!
A sound plan. Of course. For honor. Certainly. Of course. Certainly. A sound plan. Certainly. For honor. A sound plan. Justice has come. For honor. You are past redemption. Of course. Certainly. For honor. Of course. For honor. Of course. For honor. Certainly. Of course. Betrayal of the light. Certainly. Of course. Certainly. Of course. Justice has come. A sound plan. For my father, the king. Certainly. For honor. Of course. Certainly. A sound plan. Of course. For honor. Is there danger? Of course. Certainly. A sound plan. Certainly. A sound plan.
Our allied town
A
is being
sound
attacked!
plan. For honor. Of course.
More gold
I
is
stand
required.
for the light. For honor. Of course. Certainly.
Our allied town is being attacked!